Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through the massive doors of the council chamber for the last time. His boots clicked against the smooth stone floor that had been polished by countless alien feet over the centuries. The sound echoed in the huge space above his head, where the dome stretched up into darkness. Around him sat thousands of beings from across the galaxy. There were the tall blue Altarians with their 4 arms folded across their chests. The insect-like Vakari clicked their mandibles in what passed for whispers among their kind. Giant turtle-like Thraxians moved their ancient heads slowly as they watched him approach the speaking platform. Jake had given speeches here before. Many speeches. He had stood at this same spot and talked about peace between warring species. He had announced new trade agreements that made everyone richer. He had shared medical breakthroughs that saved billions of lives. But today was different. Today he carried orders that would change everything. Behind him walked Admiral Lisa Carter. Her uniform was crisp and clean, decorated with medals from a dozen different conflicts. She had fought alongside these alien species. She had bled with them. She had saved their worlds more times than anyone could count. The other human diplomats followed them both. Each one had spent years of their lives serving the Council. Each one had given up time with their families to keep the galaxy peaceful and prosperous. None of them looked happy. Jake reached the speaking platform and placed his hands on the smooth surface. The chamber grew quiet. Even the constant humming of the air system seemed to fade away. Every eye, every optical sensor, every alien sense organ focused on him. "Members of the Galactic Council," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "I stand before you today to deliver a message from the government of Earth and all human colonies." Counselor Vrex of the hegemony shifted in his seat. The lizard-like being had been particularly vocal in recent months about what he called the human problem. His forked tongue flicked out to taste the air as he waited to hear what Jake had to say. "For 300 years, Jake continued, humanity has served this council faithfully. We have mediated your disputes. We have shared our technology. We have sent our sons and daughters to die in wars that were not our own, for people who were not our own." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was not the usual diplomatic language. This was something else entirely. Jake raised his voice. "When the Vakari and the Thraxians went to war over the mining rights in the Kepler system, who stopped the fighting? When millions died from the Red Plague in the outer worlds, who found the cure? When pirates from the Void Syndicate terrorized your trade routes, whose ships hunted them down?" The chamber was silent now. Everyone knew the answer. "Humans," Jake said simply. "Always humans. We were your problem solvers, your peacekeepers, your emergency response team whenever something went wrong in your perfect galactic civilization." He paused and looked around the chamber. Some of the aliens looked uncomfortable. Others seemed angry. A few appeared confused, as if they could not understand why he was saying these things. "But that was not enough," Jake continued. "This council demanded more. You wanted our military forces placed under your direct command. You wanted our colonies to follow your laws instead of our own. You wanted us to give up our independence and become your servants." Counselor Vrex stood up. His chair scraped against the floor as he rose to his full height. "Ambassador Morrison, you forget yourself. The human species has benefited greatly from membership in this council. Your rapid advancement, your expansion across the stars, your very survival as a species owes much to our guidance and protection." Jake smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Protection? From what? From the wars that you started? From the problems that you created? From the mistakes that you made over and over again?" Admiral Carter stepped forward. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Let me be clear about something, Counselor Vrex. Humanity has never needed your protection. You have needed ours." The lizard being's eyes narrowed. "Such arrogance," You humans think too highly of yourselves. You are useful, yes, but you are still a young species, still learning your place in the galaxy. Our place? Jake laughed, and the sound was harsh in the quiet chamber. You mean our place as your problem? Solvers? Our place as your military force? Our place as the species you call on whenever your own incompetence threatens to destroy everything? He gestured toward the assembled aliens. Do you know what Counselor Vreck said about humanity just last week? He called us useful pets who had forgotten our place. The chamber erupted. Angry voices rose from a dozen different species. Some defended Vrex, others condemned him. The noise grew louder and louder until Jake raised his hand for silence. Useful pets, Jake repeated when the noise died down. That is how you see us, not as equals, not as partners, as pets. Admiral. Carter moved to stand beside him. The human government has made its decision. Effective immediately, all human forces are withdrawing from Council space. All human diplomatic personnel are returning to Earth. All human scientific and medical assistance to Council members is terminated. The silence that followed was complete. Not even the air systems seemed to be working. Jake looked directly at Counselor Vrex. You want to know our place in the galaxy? Very well. Our place is in human space, behind human borders, caring for human interests. Your place is here, in this chamber, solving your own problems for once. He turned to address the entire assembly. For 3 centuries, humanity has been the backbone that held this council together. We were the mediators who prevented your wars. We were the scientists who cured your diseases. We were the military force that protected your trade and enforced your peace. Jake's voice grew stronger, but no more. From this moment forward, the human species withdraws completely from all council affairs. We return to our own space. We close our borders. We wish you luck with your perfect galactic civilization. Admiral Carter activated a small device on her belt. Her voice echoed through the chamber and across the galaxy as she spoke into her communicator. All human vessels, this is Admiral Carter. Operation Exodus is now active. Begin immediate withdrawal to human space. Full military retreat protocols are in effect. The chamber exploded into chaos. Aliens jumped from their seats. Some shouted demands. Others pleaded for explanation. A few sat in shocked silence as they began to understand what was happening. Jake and the human delegation turned and walked toward the exit. Their footsteps echoed in the chamber, somehow audible even over the noise of thousands of panicked voices. Counselor Zek of the Altarian Commonwealth called out above the din. Ambassador Morrison, wait. Surely we can discuss this. There must be some misunderstanding. Jake stopped and turned back. There is no misunderstanding, Counselor Zek. For 300 years, humanity has given everything to this council. Our resources, our knowledge, our blood, our lives. And in return, we have been called useful pets who need to remember our place. He gestured toward Counselor Vrex, who had sunk back into his chair. Your colleague there spoke for all of you, whether you admit it or not. He said what you all think. We are useful, but we are not equals. We are tools, not partners. Jake's expression hardened. Very well. Find new tools. Train new pets. Solve your own problems. We are done. The human delegation walked out of the council chamber. Behind them, the noise grew to a roar as species that had depended on human assistance for centuries suddenly realized what they had lost. Outside the chamber, Admiral Carter spoke quietly into her communicator. Fleet Command, this is Carter. Begin Phase 2. All human installations in Council space are to be evacuated immediately. Leave nothing behind that they can use. As they walked toward their transport ship, Jake could hear the chaos continuing. Behind them, 300 years of galactic cooperation had just ended with a single speech. The humans were going home. and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy would have to learn to survive without them. Captain Roy Henderson stared at the communication screens in front of him. The human listening post on the edge of Council space had been quiet for weeks now. No emergency calls, no requests for assistance, no desperate messages asking for human help. That was the problem. "Colonel Watson needs to see this," he said to Lieutenant Pete Adams, who was monitoring the long-range sensors. "Get her on the comm right now." The lieutenant nodded and began working his console. Within minutes, Colonel Amy Watson's face appeared on the main screen. She looked tired. They all looked tired these days. Managing the complete withdrawal of human forces from half the galaxy was not an easy job. "What do you have for me, Roy?" she asked. Roy pulled up a series of reports on his screen. "Ma'am, we're picking up increased military communications from the Korvaxi Syndicate. Their fleet movements have tripled in the past month. They're expanding into systems that used to be neutral zones." Colonel Watson frowned. "Any council response?" "That's just it, ma'am. There is no response. The council fleets that used to patrol those areas pulled back to defend their home systems. The Korvaxi are moving into empty space." Roy switched to another display. "It gets worse. Piracy reports along the major trade routes are up 400%. Merchant ships that used to rely on human escort vessels are getting hit almost daily now." The colonel was quiet for a moment. "Any requests for assistance?" "None, ma'am. Radio silence from all council members. They're too proud to ask for help from the species they called useful pets." Roy had been monitoring council communications for 15 years. He had never seen anything like this. The galaxy that had once been held together by human mediation and human military power was falling apart, piece by piece. "Send me everything," Colonel Watson said. "I need to brief General Sullivan on this." The screen went dark, leaving Roy alone with the quiet hum of his equipment. He turned back to his monitors and continued listening to the galaxy tear itself apart. 3 systems. Away, Dr. Carl Peterson was having a very different kind of conversation. The head of human intelligence sat in a secure conference room with General Beth Sullivan and several other high-ranking officers. The walls of the room were covered with star charts and tactical displays. "The situation is deteriorating faster than we expected," Dr. Peterson began. He activated a holographic display that showed the current state of Council space. Red areas marked regions of conflict. Yellow zones indicated areas of instability. Green sectors showed systems that were still functioning normally. There was very little green left. "The Vakari military buildup along their border with the Thraxian Empire is massive," Peterson continued. "Our sources indicate they're preparing for a full-scale war. Without human peacekeepers to maintain the ceasefire, old grievances are boiling over." General Sullivan studied the display. "What about the other species?" "The Zellan Republic has closed its borders and stopped all scientific cooperation with other council members. They're hoarding medical supplies and research data. The Altarian Commonwealth is forming military alliances with smaller species, but only for mutual defense. No one is taking responsibility for maintaining galactic stability." Peterson switched to a different view that showed economic data. Trade between council species has dropped by 60%. Without human-mediated trade agreements, old disputes are causing economic warfare. Some species are imposing massive tariffs on others. A few have stopped trading entirely. "And the council itself?" asked Admiral Danny Kim, who was overseeing the construction of new defensive installations along human borders. "The council still meets, but attendance is down to less than half. Most species are sending junior diplomats instead of their main representatives. The important decisions are being made in private meetings between allied species, not in the main chamber." Peterson pulled up another display showing refugee movements. "This is perhaps the most telling indicator. Civilian populations are fleeing unstable regions in massive numbers, but there's nowhere for them to go. The species that used to accept refugees are now turning them away to preserve their own resources." General Sullivan stood and walked to the main display. "What about our own territory? Human space remains stable and prosperous," Peterson replied. "Our internal trade networks are functioning perfectly. Colonial development is proceeding ahead of schedule. New technological breakthroughs are happening monthly now that we don't have to share every discovery with council members immediately." The general nodded. "And our borders?" Admiral Kim stepped forward. "All border defenses are at full strength. The new installations will be completed within 6 months. We're also seeing interesting developments in our research programs now that our scientists can work without council oversight." "Interesting how?" "Our weapons research has advanced more in the past 6 months than in the previous 10 years. When you don't have to worry about other species stealing your technology or limiting your development for political reasons, progress happens much faster." Dr. Peterson activated another display. "We're also tracking the first requests for asylum from Council space. Commander Kate Phillips at Border Station 7 has processed over 300 applications this month alone." "What kind of people are requesting asylum?" General Sullivan asked. "Scientists mostly, engineers, medical researchers, people who worked closely with human teams in the past. They see what's happening to their home systems and want to get out before things get worse." The general was quiet for a long moment, studying all the displays around the room. "What's our response to asylum requests?" "Current policy is humanitarian aid only," Admiral Kim replied. "We provide food, medical care, and temporary shelter, but we don't grant permanent settlement unless the individual has specific skills we need. And no military intervention?" "None. The orders from Earth are clear. We defend human territory and human interests. Everything else is not our problem anymore." Meanwhile, at Border Station 7, Commander Kate Phillips was dealing with the practical reality of those orders. Her station sat right at the edge of human space, where it bordered 3 different council systems. Before the withdrawal, it had been a busy trade hub. Now it was becoming a refugee processing center. The latest group to arrive was from the Zelon system. Their transport ship was old and barely functional. The 43 Zelon civilians aboard looked exhausted and scared. "Commander Phillips," said the ship's captain, a middle-aged Zelon named Kev, "we request permission to enter human space. Our colony was overrun by Korvaxi raiders 2 weeks ago. We have nowhere else to go." Kate reviewed the asylum application on her screen. Standard procedure required her to check the backgrounds of all refugees and determine whether they posed any security risks. These Zelons were all civilians, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, no military personnel, no government officials, no one with access to sensitive information. "I can offer you temporary shelter and basic supplies," Kate told the captain, "but permanent settlement will require approval from Earth, and that process can take months." The Zelon's antennae drooped. "Months? Commander, we have children aboard. Elderly, injured. We need medical care and safe housing." Kate felt the familiar frustration of following orders that seemed harsh, but were necessary. "I understand your situation, Captain. We will provide medical care and temporary housing. But human space is for human citizens. That policy has not changed." What she didn't say was that similar conversations were happening at border stations all across human space. Every day brought new groups of refugees fleeing the chaos that was spreading through Council territory, and every day human commanders had to turn most of them away. Back at his listening post, Captain Roy Henderson was documenting the latest developments. The situation was getting worse by the week. A massive battle had erupted in the Vakari system between their fleet and Thraxian forces. Early reports indicated thousands of casualties and at least 12 major warships destroyed. The fighting was the worst anyone had seen in over a century. The Korvaxi Syndicate had expanded their operations into 6 new systems in the past month alone. Without human naval forces to stop them, they were looting entire worlds and selling the populations into slavery. A plague had broken out in the outer territories, the same type of plague that human medical teams had contained dozens of times in the past. But this time, There were no human medical teams coming to help. The disease was spreading unchecked from system to system. Roy compiled all the information into his daily report and sent it up the chain of command. Someone needed to document what was happening to the galaxy. Someone needed to keep track of how quickly a civilization could fall apart when the people holding it together decided to walk away. As he finished his report, Roy's communication system chimed with an incoming message. It was from deep in Council space, transmitted on an emergency frequency. The message was simple. This is Counselor Zek of the Altarian Commonwealth. We request immediate consultation with human authorities on mutual security concerns. The situation has become critical. Please respond. Roy stared at the message for a long moment. Then he filed it with all the other requests for help that arrived every day. His orders were clear. Monitor and report. Do not respond. Do not engage. Do not help. The humans had walked away, and they were not coming back. Captain Steve Martinez watched through his ship's view screen as another refugee fleet limped toward the human border. The massive collection of ships stretched across space like a wounded animal dragging itself to safety. There had to be at least 50,000 beings aboard those vessels. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. 2 years of watching the galaxy burn from a safe distance. Captain, called Lieutenant Ben Parker from the communications station. The lead ship is requesting permission to enter human space. They're carrying wounded from the Vakari attacks on the Centauri colonies. Steve had seen this same scene dozens of times. Desperate aliens fleeing wars that used to be stopped before they could start, before humans were there to stop them. Standard response, Lieutenant. Humanitarian aid at the border station. No entry into human territory without proper authorization. The young officer looked uncomfortable. Sir, they're reporting severe casualties. Children among the wounded. Their medical facilities are failing. Steve felt the familiar weight in his chest. The same weight that every human border commander carried these days. Send medical supplies and emergency personnel to assist at the border station, but they do not cross into human space. Through the view screen, Steve could see the scorch marks on the refugee ships. Weapons fire. The Vakari had not been gentle. With the civilians, they drove from their homes. The Vakari-Thraxian War had become something terrible. Without human peacekeepers to enforce rules of engagement or protect civilians, both sides had embraced total warfare. Entire planets were being bombed from orbit. Civilian populations were being targeted deliberately. The fighting had spread to 12 different star systems. Steve's communication system chimed with an incoming message from command. Senator Holly Adams appeared on his screen. She looked older than when the humans had first withdrawn. They all looked older now. Captain Martinez, I need your latest report on refugee numbers and species composition. Steve pulled up his files. Senator, we've processed over 2 million asylum requests in the past 6 months, mostly civilians from the war zones, but also significant numbers fleeing the Corvaxi expansion and the plague outbreaks in the Rim territories. How many have we granted permanent settlement? Less than 5%. Only individuals with critical skills, or those who can provide valuable intelligence about conditions in Council space. Senator Adams nodded grimly. What about the requests for military assistance? Those arrive daily, ma'am. The Altarian Commonwealth has sent 47 separate messages requesting human intervention in their border dispute with the hegemony. The Zellan Republic wants us to help contain the plague that's spreading through their outer colonies. Even Counselor Vrex has sent 3 messages asking for a meeting. Our response? No response, ma'am. As ordered. The senator was quiet for a moment. Captain, I need you to understand something. What we're doing here is not cruelty. It's necessity. For 3 centuries, we solved everyone else's problems while they took credit for our work and treated us like servants. If we step in now, nothing will have changed. Steve understood the logic, but it was still hard to watch. Ma'am, with respect, some of these situations are getting very bad. The plague alone has killed over 1 billion beings in the past year. A plague that our medical teams could have contained in weeks if they had been asked politely instead of demanded to work under council oversight, Adams replied sharply. Captain, these species chose pride over survival. They chose to maintain their sense of superiority rather than admit they needed help. The consequences are theirs to bear. After the call ended, Steve returned to watching the refugee fleet. The ships looked so small against the darkness of space, so fragile. He wondered how many of the beings aboard those vessels had supported Counselor Vrex when he called humans useful pets. Meanwhile, deep in human space, Dr. Paul Richardson was studying intelligence reports that painted an even darker picture. His office in the Human Intelligence Division was filled with data streams from across the galaxy. The information they contained was horrifying. The Korvaxi Syndicate had grown into something that could barely be called a criminal organization anymore. It was more like a plague of locusts that consumed everything in its path. They had conquered, or destroyed 47 different star systems. Their fleets now numbered in the thousands of ships. Without human naval forces to hunt them down, the Korvaxi had embraced technologies that the Council had banned centuries ago. Slave chips that turned captured populations into mindless workers. Biological weapons that poisoned entire planets. Reality-warping devices that tore holes in space itself. Paul read through the latest reports from Agent Laura Fox, who was still operating deep undercover in what remained of Council territory. Her messages painted a picture of complete societal collapse. On Centauri Prime, the Council chamber that had once held thousands now seated fewer than 100 representatives. Most species had withdrawn their diplomats to protect their home systems. The few who remained spent their time arguing about who was to blame for the crisis rather than trying to solve it. The grand alliances that had maintained galactic peace for millennia were breaking apart. The Altarian Commonwealth was at war, with the hegemony over mining rights. The Zelon Republic had closed its borders entirely and was shooting down any ship that approached their territory. Even species that had been allies for centuries were turning on each other over resources and territory. But Paul's most disturbing reports came from the Outer Rim, where something far worse than war or crime was stirring. Agent Fox had managed to infiltrate a Korvaxi research facility on the edge of known space. What she found there made Paul's blood run cold. The criminals were not just using banned technologies. They were experimenting with things that should never be touched. Void touched. Paul had to read the report 3 times before he fully understood what Fox was describing. The Korvaxi had found one of the old containment sites. One of the places where humanity and the Council had worked together centuries ago to seal away entities from the dark spaces between dimensions. The seals were weakening. Paul immediately forwarded the report to General Chris Johnson, head of Human Defense Forces. This was beyond intelligence gathering. This was a threat that could consume the entire galaxy if it was not stopped. General Johnson's response came back within an hour. Continue monitoring. Do not engage. Assess threat level to human space only. Paul stared at the message for a long time. He understood the order, but he also understood what the void touched represented. They were not just another enemy that could be fought with ships and weapons. They were entities that fed on suffering and despair. The more chaos and destruction in the galaxy, the stronger they became. And right now, the galaxy was providing them with more food than they had tasted in centuries. Back on Centauri Prime, the few remaining council members were beginning to grasp the true scope of their situation. Counselor Zek of the Altarian Commonwealth sat in his private chambers, staring at reports that grew more desperate every day. The economic collapse alone was staggering. Trade between council species had dropped by over 80%. Entire sectors were reverting to subsistence economies as supply chains broke down. Technological development had nearly stopped as species hoarded their knowledge and refused to share research. But the military situation was even worse. Without human forces to maintain the balance of power, every old rivalry and territorial dispute had exploded into open warfare. The Vakari and Thraxians were bombing each other's colonies into radioactive rubble. The hegemony was using chemical weapons against Altarian settlements. Species that had lived in peace for generations were committing genocide against their neighbors. Counselor Zek activated his personal communication system and composed another message to the human government. It was the 53rd such message he had sent since the withdrawal. Like all the others, it would probably be ignored. To the leadership of humanity, he began. I am writing to inform you that the situation in Council space has become critical. Multiple wars are raging across dozens of systems. Civilian casualties are in the billions. Economic collapse is threatening the survival of entire species. He paused, struggling with the words that came next. We understand that our past treatment of humanity was inappropriate. We acknowledge that we took your contributions for granted and failed to show proper respect for your sacrifices. We formally apologize for these errors. The words felt like poison in his mouth, but they were true. The Council had treated humans badly, and now they were paying the price. We request immediate humanitarian assistance and possible military intervention to restore stability. We are prepared to offer significant territorial concessions and complete access to our technology in exchange for help. Zek sent the message, knowing it would join the hundreds of others that human authorities were ignoring. But he had to try. Every day of delay meant more death, more destruction, more chaos. What he did not know was that in the dark spaces between the stars, ancient things were stirring. The void touched had been sleeping for centuries, held back by barriers that required constant maintenance, barriers that had always been maintained by human psychics' woe. Commander Rick Turner felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up as he stared at the sensor readings. His monitoring station at the edge of human space had detected something that should not exist, something that had been locked away for 3 centuries. Lieutenant Walsh, he called to his communications officer. Get me a direct line to Fleet Command. Priority Alpha. Lieutenant Megan Walsh looked up from her console. Her face was pale as she read the same sensor data that had alarmed her commander. Sir, are those readings accurate? Because if they are... They are, Rick said grimly. And we need to report this immediately. The sensor array showed massive energy distortions in the Kepler Nebula, roughly 50 light-years from the nearest human outpost. The energy signatures matched nothing in any known database except for one classified file that Rick hoped he would never have to open. The void touched were breaking through. Within an hour, Rick found himself on a secure video conference with General Chris Johnson and half the human high command. The faces on his screen looked as grim as he felt. Commander Turner, General Johnson began, walk me through exactly what your sensors detected. Rick activated his display. At 0347 hours this morning, we registered massive reality distortions in Grid Sector 7 Alpha. The energy patterns match archived data from the Void Wars 3 centuries ago. Sir, something is tearing holes in normal space. How many breakthrough points? Asked Admiral Nancy Clark. 3 confirmed, sir. Possibly more. The distortions are expanding every hour. General Johnson was quiet for a long moment. Any sign of entities coming through? Not yet, sir, but the breach points are stabilizing. Based on historical data, that usually happens right before they start sending scouts through. The general rubbed his face with his hands. How long before they can mount a full invasion? Unknown, sir. During the original Void Wars, it took them 6 months to establish a foothold after the first breakthrough. But that was when we had the full council working with us to maintain the barriers. Now, Rick let the sentence hang in the air. Everyone on the call understood what he meant. The psychic barriers that had kept the void touched, sealed away required Constant maintenance by telepaths from multiple species working together. Human psychics provided the mental strength and stability. Alien telepaths provided specialized techniques and raw psychic power. But there were no alien telepaths helping anymore. The few that survived the various wars raging across the galaxy were too busy trying to keep their own species alive. The barriers had been weakening for months. President Diana Murphy joined the call from her office on Earth. She looked tired, as if she had not slept in days. "General Johnson, what are our options here?" "Limited, Madam President. We can reinforce our own borders and hope the void-touched focus on Council space first, or we can break our isolation and try to re-establish the barriers before they break through completely." What would re-establishing the barriers require? Dr. Kevin Roberts, the head of human psychic research, spoke up from his laboratory. "Madam President, we would need cooperation from at least 6 different telepathic species. We would need access to the original containment sites, most of which are deep in Council space, and we would need to do it while fighting off whatever entities have already broken through. In other words," the President said, "we would need to save the same people who called us useful pets and expected us to know our place." "Yes, ma'am." The President was quiet for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. "Continue monitoring the situation. Prepare our defenses. Do not engage unless the entities threaten human space directly." After the call ended, Rick returned to his sensor station. His job was to watch for signs of the void-touched emergence and report everything he saw. It was not a job he enjoyed. The void-touched were not like any other enemy the galaxy had faced. They were not aliens from another world or dimension. They were something far worse. They were entities that existed in the dark spaces between realities, feeding on suffering and despair. During the original Void Wars, entire star systems had been consumed before the combined forces of humanity, and the Council had managed to seal them away. The barriers they had built were supposed to last forever, but forever required maintenance, and maintenance required cooperation. 2 days later, Lieutenant Megan Walsh was leading a deep space patrol when her ship encountered something that would give her nightmares for the rest of her life. The patrol was routine, checking the outer boundaries of human space for refugees or hostile forces. What they found instead was a ship that should not have existed. "Commander Walsh," called Ensign Tom Baker from the sensor station, "I'm reading a vessel at the edge of our detection range. Configuration unknown. Energy signature is strange." Megan moved to the sensor console and studied the readings. The ship appeared to be roughly the size of a Council cruiser, but its design was unlike anything in any database. The hull seemed to twist and bend in ways that hurt to look at, and the energy it was giving off made her feel sick. "All stop," she ordered. "Battle stations, send a full sensor sweep to command immediately." As her crew worked, Megan watched the strange ship through the view screen. It was moving slowly toward human space, but not in a straight line. It drifted back and forth like a drunk person walking down a hallway. "Ma'am," called the communications officer, "I'm picking up a transmission from that ship, but it's not in any language I recognize." "Put it through the universal translator." The bridge speakers crackled with static, and then a voice emerged. But it was not really a voice at all. It was something that sounded like screaming mixed with laughter, mixed with the sound of metal being torn apart. "Food," the voice said. "Such sweet food. Fear and pain and despair. We have been hungry for so long." Megan felt ice form in her stomach. "Cut the transmission. Helm, take us back to base. Maximum speed." "Ma'am, should we engage the contact?" "No. We run. Right now." As her ship fled toward human space, Megan watched the strange vessel on her rear sensors. It did not follow them. Instead, it turned toward Council space, where wars raged and billions suffered, where there was plenty of food for things that fed on fear. Back at command, General Johnson studied the sensor recordings and felt the weight of 3 centuries of history pressing down on him. The footage was clear. The void touched had sent their first scout ship through the weakened barriers. "How long before they send a full force?" he asked Dr. Roberts. "Based on previous patterns, maybe a month. The scouts will establish feeding points in areas with high levels of suffering and despair. Then they'll open permanent gateways for the main invasion force. And the council space is providing them with plenty of suffering." "Yes, sir. The wars, the refugee crises, the economic collapse. It's like setting out a banquet for them." General Johnson called another emergency session with the human high command. This time the debate was more intense. "We cannot let the void touched establish a foothold," argued Admiral Clark. "Once they do, they'll spread across the entire galaxy, including our space. But engaging them means working with the council species again," countered General Sullivan. "It means going back to being their cleanup crew." President Murphy joined the debate from Earth. "What if we approach this differently? What if we don't save the council because they deserve it, but because we need to save ourselves?" Dr. Roberts activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. "Madam President, the void touched, spread by consuming suffering and despair. Every war in council space makes them stronger. Every refugee crisis feeds them. Every economic collapse gives them power." He highlighted areas where the entities were most likely to establish their first bases. "If they get a solid foothold in council space, they'll be strong enough to break through our defenses within a year. Maybe less." The president studied the display. "So our choice is to let the galaxy burn and face the void touched when they're at full strength, or intervene now while they're still weak." "Yes, ma'am. But intervention means working with species that treated us like servants for 3 centuries. Yes, ma'am." President Murphy was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "General Johnson, begin preparations for Operation Phoenix. We're going back to council space." "Ma'am, with respect, the people will not understand this decision. They supported the withdrawal. They wanted us to stay out of galactic affairs." The president's expression hardened. "General, I did not say we were going back to save the council. I said we were going back to save ourselves. There's a difference." "What difference, ma'am?" "When we went to their aid before, we went as partners, as equals working together for mutual benefit. This time, we go as conquerors. We save the galaxy from the void touched, not because the council deserves it, but because we need a galaxy to live in." She paused and looked around at the assembled officers. "And when it's over, there will be no question about who is in charge. No more useful pet comments. No more demands that we know our place. The species that survive this crisis will survive because we allow it." General Johnson nodded slowly. "And the species that don't survive? That will be their choice. They can accept human leadership and live, or they can maintain their pride and die. Either way, the age of human subservience is over forever." As the meeting ended, General Johnson began planning the largest military operation in human history. They were going back to save a galaxy that had scorned T-Fleet Admiral Tony Martinez, stood on the bridge of the human flagship watching the largest military force in human history prepare for battle. 4 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. Now they were returning, but not as the helpful servants they had once been. Through the view screen, Tony could see thousands of human warships arranged in perfect formation. These were not the ships that had left Council space 4 years ago. These were new vessels, built with technology that the Council had never seen, technology that humans had developed in secret while the galaxy tore itself apart. "Admiral," called Captain Julie Evans from her position at the tactical station. "Long-range sensors show massive void-touched presence in the Andromeda sector. At least 50 ships, sir." Tony nodded. The reconnaissance missions had brought back exactly what they expected to find. The entities from dark space had established feeding points throughout the former Council territory. They were growing stronger every day, feasting on the fear and despair that filled the galaxy. "Any word from the Council?" Tony asked. Counselor Zek has sent another 17 messages in the past week, sir, all requesting immediate assistance, all offering complete surrender to human authority in exchange for help. Tony smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Too little, too late. We're not here to answer their requests. We're here to clean up their mess on our terms. Behind him, President Tyler Jackson appeared on the main communication screen, broadcasting from Earth to the entire human fleet. "Soldiers of humanity," the president began. "4 years ago, we walked away from a galaxy that treated us like servants. We were called useful pets who needed to know our place. Today, we return to show them what our place really is." Tony listened to the speech while studying tactical displays showing the current state of the galaxy. 2/3 of Council space was either under void-touched control or completely uninhabitable due to the various wars still raging between the surviving species. "We do not return as saviors," President Jackson continued. "We do not return as partners. We return as the rightful rulers of a galaxy that proved it cannot govern itself. Any species that survives what comes next will do so under human authority." The president's image disappeared, replaced by the tactical overview of Operation Phoenix. The plan was simple in concept, but massive in scope. Human forces would systematically eliminate every void-touched presence in the galaxy, regardless of what happened to the alien populations caught in the crossfire. "All ships," Tony announced over the fleet communication system. "Operation Phoenix is now active. Remember, we are not here to rescue anyone. We are here to eliminate a threat to human space. Everything else is secondary." The human fleet moved forward into what had once been Council territory. What they found there was worse than anyone had imagined. Commander Noah Campbell led the first assault wave into the Vega system, where a major void-touched base had been established. His ships emerged from hyperspace to find a scene from a nightmare. Void-touched had not simply conquered the system. They had transformed it. The planets hung in space like rotting fruit, their surfaces twisted into impossible shapes that hurt to look at. Reality itself seemed unstable around their ships, bending and warping in ways that made his crew sick. "Sir," called Lieutenant Dave Wilson from the sensor station, "I'm reading massive civilian populations on the surface, but the life signs are wrong." Noah studied the readings. The people down there were alive, but their mental patterns showed nothing but pure terror and despair. The void-touched were keeping them that way on purpose, farming their fear like humans farmed crops. "Open fire on all void-touched vessels," Noah ordered. "Do not target the planets unless there are no other options." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Human weapons, developed in 4 years of secret research, tore through void-touched defenses like paper, but the entities did not fight like normal enemies. They used reality itself as a weapon, twisting space and time to confuse human targeting systems. Noah watched his ships advance steadily through the system, destroying everything that registered as a void-touched entity. But he also watched the planets below, where billions of alien civilians continued to suffer. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving surrender messages from the surface, multiple species begging for rescue." No response, Noah said firmly. "Our job is to eliminate the void-touched, not rescue aliens who let this happen in the first place." The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, every void-touched ship in the system had been destroyed. But the planets remained twisted and broken, their populations traumatized beyond repair. This scene repeated itself across the galaxy as human forces moved from system to system. They were efficient, ruthless, and completely focused on their primary mission. The void-touched had never faced an enemy like this. General Rachel Scott led the final assault on the source point, the original breach where the entities had first entered normal space. Her forces included the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built, devices that could manipulate reality itself. The source point was located in what had once been the heart of Council space, near the ruins of Zentari Prime. The entire region was now a twisted wasteland where physics worked differently, and time moved in circles. "General," reported Colonel Sam Turner from his position aboard the command ship, "we're detecting massive void-touched presence at the source point. They're trying to open a permanent gateway for their main invasion force." Rachel studied the tactical displays. The entities had built a massive structure around the breach point, something that looked like a cross between a space station and a cancer tumor. It pulsed with dark energy that made her feel cold just looking at it. "All ships, final assault formation," she ordered. "We end this here and now." The battle for the source point was the most intense fighting of the entire war. The void touched. Threw everything they had at the human fleet, but they had underestimated what 4 years of secret weapons development could accomplish. Human ships fired weapons that deleted sections of space itself. They deployed devices that reset local reality to its original state, forcing the entities back into the dark spaces where they belonged. They used technologies that the Council had never dreamed of, tools that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. When the fighting ended, the source point was not just sealed. It was completely erased from existence, replaced with a section of reinforced space-time that could never be breached again. The void touched were gone, banished back to the darkness between dimensions. But the galaxy they left behind was broken, beyond repair. President Jackson stood before the human assembly on Earth, delivering a speech that would be remembered for centuries. "The threat has been eliminated," he announced. "The void-touched have been defeated and their breach points sealed permanently. The galaxy is safe from cosmic horror." He paused and looked out at the assembled representatives. "But the galaxy is not the same place it was before. 2/3 of Council space is uninhabitable. Most of the species that once ruled the stars are extinct or reduced to scattered refugees." The president activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic civilization. Vast areas were marked in red, indicating dead or abandoned systems. The few remaining pockets of civilization were small and isolated. Humanity now controls all major trade routes, all strategic resources, and all advanced technology. The species that survived the chaos did so only because we allowed it. This is the new reality. He looked directly at the cameras that would broadcast, his words across human space. "We walked away once because we were treated like servants. We have returned as masters. Any alien species that wishes to rebuild their civilization will do so under human oversight and according to human law." Ambassador Jake Morrison, now much older than when he had first walked out of the council chamber, was given the task of establishing the new galactic order. He set up his headquarters in the ruins of Zentari Prime, where the old council had once met. The few surviving alien leaders who came to meet with him were a pathetic sight. Councillor Zek of the Altarian Commonwealth arrived with only a small escort, representing what remained of his once mighty species. A handful of Zellan refugees came seeking permission to establish a new colony. Even a few Vikari survivors appeared, begging for protection from human forces. "Welcome to the new Galactic Order," Jake told them as they gathered in what had once been the Grand Council chamber. "You will notice some changes from the old system." The chamber was much smaller now, with simple human chairs replacing the elaborate alien seating arrangements. Human flags hung from the walls instead of the banners of dozens of different species. "First," Jake continued, "all military forces in human-controlled space will be under direct human command. Second, all major economic decisions will require human approval. Third, all technology sharing will be at human discretion only." Councillor Zek raised one of his 4 hands. "Ambassador Morrison, surely there can be some room for negotiation, some recognition of our historical status as founding members of the galactic community." Jake L.